Well, good afternoon. We're here for a wonderful conversation between several different religious leaders, helping us to survive in this crazy world we live in. I want to present our panelists. We have Sister Pamela Smith. She has served in educational and administrative ministries for 5 decades. Yes, she has. She is currently the Director of Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs for the Catholic Diocese of Charleston, which spans the whole state. She holds a PhD in systematic theology from Duquesne University. She has published 15 books on biblical, environmental, and literary topics, and is a regular columnist for the Catholic Miscellanea and the Charleston Mercury. She has lived in Bluffton since 2005. Welcome, Sister Smith.
Thank you very much, Reverend Black.
We have Bishop Craig Dixon. He has served the Hilton Head Ward of the Church of the Latter-day Saints since December 2018. Before then, he served as a counselor for 2 bishops over a period of 6 years and has held the position of Elders Quorum President and High Priest Group Leader. His favorite calling was the Young Men's President. He loves serving young people, and that is his favorite activity. As a young man, Bishop Dixon completed 4 years of early morning seminary study, and we're going to ask him to explain that a little later on. And that was during his high school years. He's also an Eagle Scout, and later he served 2 full years as an LDS missionary to Mexico City, where he met the best people and ate the finest food on the
Yes.
Bishop Dixon is a Marian School of Management graduate from Brigham Young University and is completing a master's degree in psychology from North Central University. He is married to his sweetheart, Tricia Dixon, and they're the proud parents of three children, Danielle, Natalie, and Benjamin. Rabbi Bloom, I change your CV. Rabbi Bloom has been the spiritual leader of Congregation Beth Yam since July 1st, 2009. Rabbi Bloom has 33 years of rabbinical service, serving synagogues from Florida to California, from the Midwest to the Deep South, and now he's currently here in Hilton Head. Here's one of his quotes. "At the heart of what I do, the role of rabbi as teacher, whether it is with children, teens, or young and older adults, gives me the ultimate joy of being a rabbi. I hope that the rest of my life I will always have the chance to teach Torah, Jewish history, and mysticism." His biggest claim to fame is he's married to Linda, and they have 1 child, Leah, and she's married to Michael Mitchell. Welcome, Rabbi. Amen. Let me just talk a little bit. We had an election yesterday.
Yeah.
65% of the eligible voters voted. In 2016, 58% of the eligible voters voted. Everyone was surprised that our current president overperformed when you looked at the polling. Fox News is now reporting there are 7 states too close to call or too early to call. Alaska, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. These states represent 86 electoral college votes. Both candidates, based on the last information I have, both candidates have a pathway to victory. Here's some other little facts. Nevada is predicting a final count sometime on Thursday. Arizona has until November 10th to declare a winner. Pennsylvania claimed that they can take up until November 29th to legally claim a winner. Wisconsin has a mandatory recount if the vote is in 0.5%. Our state, we reported out early for Donald Trump, and that was across the board and down the ticket. The stock market jumped yesterday. And for those who looked at their accounts today, it soared even more today.
Mm.
Rarely have we seen such contrasting visions for our nation's future. So I'm going to start with Sister Smith. What time did you go to bed last night?
I went to bed at 11:05. I had been flipping channels, and what I concluded from the mainstream media and educational TV was that we were not going to know for a number of days. And I went to bed with the hope and the prayer that we were not going to have something like the Hanging Chads fiasco that we had in the year 2000. So I prayed quietly and went to sleep.
I'm going to throw a question you weren't expecting. We had a Roman Catholic pro-choice candidate, and we had a businessman pro-life candidate. How did that affect your community?
With great difficulty. I think a lot of people, especially the Catholics here in Bluffton, come from the Northeast and the upper Midwest. There are a few that were actually born and raised here. And then, of course, we have a very significant Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx population. One of the difficulties for Catholics is that we are resolutely pro-life from our own tradition and from papal teaching and bishops' teachings. And I teach pro-life ethics, etc., human dignity, sacredness of human life from conception to natural death. So a lot of the people were historically Democrats because the party was seen as pro-immigrant, pro-racial justice, pro-healthcare, et cetera, But a lot of people I talk to just feel as though they don't really have a party, or they have simply switched. And one thing I have to say, though, is that there was not much partisan rumbling at church, and our church parish life center was a voting place. Though you heard occasional things from people, a lot of it was, I'm praying. And yesterday, our church was open till 9 p.m. for people to come and pray, simply for a peaceful election. And but that has created vexation for so many of us who have ended up being independents and almost going person by person, major issue by major issue. It's easier to vote in a local election and so on. Yeah, and the whole pro-choice Catholic is a real anomaly as far as pretty much all of us are concerned. Yeah.
I think a similar dynamic happened for some. I can't speak for everybody in LDS, but there seemed to have been a rift between, say, the Romney camp and the Trump camp. I don't know if you can speak to that or not, but first I want to know, what time did you go to bed last night? And second, were there similar issues in your community?
Well, like Sister Smith, I decided to go to bed early, but then I woke up at 1 a.m. and I just had to get up, right? So I checked, and actually, I was humbled to, first of all, to be invited to this panel. I wanted to be prepared. So I appreciate, first of all, let me just say, being invited to be with such accomplished individuals in the faith community. And Dr. Black, you didn't introduce yourself properly, but I guess everyone knows you, but as a former Navy chaplain and all that you do, it's just so tremendous. So I personally want to thank you and Dr. Bloom for introducing me to you and all the good that Rabbi Bloom has done for us as well. So I got up early, woke up a little bit and checked to see how our nation was doing. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's, I think, what 2020 can be characterized as, is a year of uncertainty. And good can come from that, of course, but it certainly stretched us and our people. Regarding the candidates and the issue of pro-life, of course, the Latter-day Saints are also, like our Catholic brothers and sisters, very, very pro-life. And it's one of our core principles. In our church, we don't, every year before the election, every 4 years, we read a statement from our church, and they always send it out, written out, encouraging us to be active citizens, and they encourage us to become informed on the issues and the candidates. But they always emphasize that the church, I'll just read the statement. Well, the church affirms its institutional neutrality regarding political parties and candidates, individual members should participate in the political process.
Right, right.
So I'm sure, like many of you, we don't talk politics over the pulpit, not even in Sunday school, frankly, maybe a little bit in the hallway. That's probably where some of the friction I've seen. But even then, that's typically discouraged. So yes, it's been difficult to reconcile ourselves with the positions of parties and platforms. But frankly, even as Latter-day Saints, we're fairly diverse. We have Harry Reid, who's an LDS practicing active member, leader of the House and the Democratic movement, and then we have the Mitt Romneys, and then of course now we have people that like what they see from Trump. So I would just say in the Latter-day Saint community, with Hispanics, with our Black African American brothers and sisters in our church, Caucasians, we have diversity actually in our political positions. Our core values of pro-life, marriage between a man and a woman remain, but besides that, I'm seeing a little bit of everything.
Yeah, if I may just tag on to that too, like Bishop Dixon saying, getting information from headquarters. We certainly have gotten that from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and our own bishop. And Bishop Guglielmone in Charleston made it a strong point to say, be informed on the issues. We publish resources about where candidates stand on various issues of social justice, pro-life, etc. And he just simply said, we're not Republican, we're not Democrat, we're Catholic. And that's what we take into the ballot box, you know, or the voting machine. Yeah.
Well, Rabbi, there's a very diverse Jewish community globally. And in some way, our current president has reached out to certain aspects of the Jewish community, such as the work he's doing in Israel, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. And then there are other aspects where he might have crossed into a different place. We're talking pro-life versus a woman's right to choose or her reproductive rights. So I imagine in your community, there are multiple factions or multiple groups. How is your community addressing these issues in this election?
Which one would you like to go first?
When they look at the candidates, is there one issue that pulls a certain group in a certain direction?
Well, I think that
is there a litmus test issue?
I think if you want to talk in large macro level terms, you'll see that a lot of the Orthodox Jewish community is right behind President Trump because of his decisions on moving the embassy and the fact that he has had some success on establishing new relationships with a few of the Gulf oil states and Africa with Sudan. So I think that though they are, for those folks, basically one issue folk. If whatever the candidate's view is on Israel, just like there are people who say if the candidate is anti-choice, then I'm going to vote for that person because I'm against choice. I don't believe that people should have abortion. So if the candidate is for that, then fine. You know, so we have the same one issue people, you know, as well as the diversity of American Jewry that doesn't take that view. So I would say that American Jews look just like lots of other constituencies because our branches of Judaism give us lots of different opinions about all kinds of issues. Liberal Jews are going to look like liberal Democrats. And, you know, a lot of the Orthodox Jews, not all, will go into President Trump's camp because of the Israel issue. And everybody else is kind of, you know, chooses their issue. I think lots of Jews are probably, like lots of Americans, concerned about the COVID issue. And, you know, when you look at the Pew survey, you can see how Americans come down and how Democrats and Republicans in voting, how they prioritize their issues. And they certainly look different when it comes to people who voted for the president versus people who voted for the vice president. And I think that American Jewry is probably as split up and diverse.
And just to fill out the panel, typically my denomination is very socially active. We have a commission on social activism. We're issue oriented, but when you look at our voting pattern, you're going to probably find about 90% of us are going to vote toward the Liberal Party. Even though we carry conservative and liberal, there's a saying, we don't fit either party well. And I think everyone would agree with that.
Right.
You don't
Right
fit.
now, especially. Yeah.
But I would imagine if you were to see who actually voted where, probably about 90%, like I said. And I'm basing that also on a public public figure I saw that said Trump might have gotten as much as 10% of the Black vote, which is unique for a Republican candidate to get that high a percentage of Black vote. So this is a different environment. Let me ask this question to our panel. You know, we learned a lot about America last night, didn't we? I'm going to always start, I'm going to follow that same rotation. So I'm going to start with Sister Smith. What surprised you in this election?
Well, it didn't so much surprise me that we were divided, because I think we've been seeing for several decades that urban versus rural or small town America, there's quite a distinction. And so I was not surprised by that. I was surprised how close it came in some of the places where it had been predicted that would be strongly for one or for the other. And so that may have surprised me. The other thing is that because people have been so passionate about this, I was very glad that there were extremely limited reports of harassment at the polls. And also that I think I found among people I know that I thought were going to be putting out all kinds of crazy stuff on social media. Instead, they were being very quiet. Now, I was at a funeral this morning, so nobody was talking politics there. But I think just kind of saying, you know, trusting the process, trusting God, waiting, seemed to be the mode of communication I was getting from a lot of people. I wasn't up when the president came out, but that probably would not have surprised me either.
That's right. Bishop Dixon, did you learn anything new? Anything surprised you in the process?
Well, a couple things, but primarily I agree with Sister Smith and what she shared there. So I'll just say that at least among the Latter-day Saint community, which has often been a very, a conservative voting bloc, I think we've reached the point where there's much more diversity now among our Latter-day Saints. And they're not voting along a party line anymore. They're looking at the candidates, specific issues that are most important to them, as Rabbi Bloom noted. There's some issues that are very important to different individuals. So as I visit with them, it's broad. And yet we're so polarized right now that I think that's kind of why you say we've learned some things about ourselves, is the polarization of the candidates and the issues and the extreme positions that are being taken are really testing us because there are no easy answers. And we're all having to compromise in some way to be able to move forward and pick a position and move forward. So that's probably what I learned is, things like, state of Arizona went with Biden, I believe. I'm not sure that happens every year. And so there are a couple of things like that I think the Democratic Party and Biden resonated with conservative people who are pro-life, but like the way and the tone of his message. But yet Trump's message resonates with a lot of people who care about issues around freedom and protection. And so I think that's something that I learned, is that just because you're a member of a certain faith, it's probably not safe to say, oh, they're probably going to vote this way anymore. certainly if it continues this way.
Same question at you, Rabbi. New learnings, any surprises?
Yeah, I'm surprised that I went to bed at 3 a.m. in the morning and I was on a Zoom meeting by 9 o'clock the next morning and looking like I knew what I was doing. So I was surprised at that at first. I was surprised, I think, to face a reality that while even if Mr. Biden ekes out a political victory, I think for a lot of people, this is a really stark reminder of how divided this country is in terms of fundamental core values.
Mm-hmm.
Core values. And I'm going to read something to you, if I may, that I got from a congregant this morning. May I do that? It's not too long. It's so it says here, this woman is responding to somebody else's statement. She says, this person's statement is, you know what I'm going to do the day after election day if my candidate loses? Go to work, be happy, live my life, love others. If he wins, the same. Now, I just want to say, this is their comment. I see people posting this sentiment below, she says, and each time I cringe. I cringe from my college professor who was scared over the future status of her same-sex marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I cringe for my former colleague who doesn't know what will happen to her health care coverage.
Mm-hmm.
I cringe for my Black friends who fear what this will mean for their children. For some people, this election is about their human rights. It is heavy and it is hard. If today feels like a normal day, that is privilege.
Mm.
Without going into the rest of their statement, I think that sort of says it all. I think that this is for people who were very much in the Biden camp, a moral reckoning that they are out of step with, at the very least, half the country, if not more. I think that I'm surprised because I'm trying to force myself not to get used to some of the drama that I see coming out of the president with regard to calling the election a fraud. I really believe in democracy. I thought that I was surprised in a good way to see the amount of people voting, both before and during, the process. I think that was great. But I feel like maybe the word isn't surprised, but I think we're dealing with something that's staring us in the face, that we are really in two different universes for the most part. So I think I'm doing a reset about what that means in living in a red state, which I should say comes with the territory. I think for a lot of our congregants in our synagogue who tend to be more on the liberal side, and those they're probably having a very difficult time right now. But for those who are on the Republican side and vote for President Trump, they always have a tough time because they're the majority out in the community at large, but inside their own synagogue, they're a minority.
Mm-hmm.
So they, in terms of that, I think that that's something that we're going to have to cope with and figure out how we can carry on the business of religion and God work knowing that God work is not just something inside a worship service. It's something that happens everywhere we go. And that's going to be a challenge.
Well, I'm going to drop my 2 cents in also. And a lot of what Rabbi said, I resonate with. From our community, the notion that our current president will be reelected tells us that our community is more aligned with, and I'm going to use this terrible term, systemic racism than we thought. And I say that because the president has made verbal comments about race with impunity, about immigrants with impunity. And so, and I just knew in my heart that we were going to slap his wrist at least with a good turnout of liberal people, voters, and we didn't. As a matter of fact, I heard that there were many, including in the Black community, closeted Trumpers. People who were not publicly, and that was the reason for possibly the polls pointing in certain directions. So, yes.
I have a question for you. It interests me because I had spoken with the political director of the Jamie Harrison campaign, who I understand got clobbered last with all of the, and having interviewed him on my podcast show along with Lindsey Graham, you know, and all the press and the polls, she said to me, when I met with her privately recently, she said, our biggest concern is Black males. And to be frank with you, I would like to hear you try and give us an explanation. Why, Reverend, would Black men be such a constituency, enough to make a difference, that they would vote for the president? So if you could help me with that, I would like to, she gave me an explanation of why. She told me her view why, but I'd rather hear it from the cloth than from the political director.
I am as baffled as anyone with that. I see the phenomenon. A matter of fact, one of my colleagues is very verbal. He's a pastor, and he tries to align strictly on the pro-life issue. And he feels that Trump has done more to sway the country and the world with the pro-life issue. I struggle with it because the language seems so clear on what he's saying, and the path that he's making for us seems so dark that I don't understand. I do know I have a colleague, I say, a acquaintance, that I think he wants the swag of being in the party that won. And I know that sounds pretty trivial, but I'm just speaking for individuals I know. As a group, I can't explain that phenomenon other than the pro-life issue. I'm curious to hear what you got from the interview.
Well, number one, that the Trump campaign has to be given a lot of credit from a war room perspective. That they did very well on a variety of things. One is that they brought out the vote in the rural communities where their strength is, and they did bring out the vote, which is good for democracy. You know, they did what they were supposed to do. But when it comes to another good thing that they did from their perspective is that they have spent an inordinate amount of time courting Black clergy.
They did.
And this is what I'm told. I don't know this to be factual, but I have read about it since I was told by the Harrison's political director. The second thing is that that Trump has invested a tremendous amount of money in Black colleges and universities. And there's payback, in a good sense, rewarding for that. The third thing is that there's this legislation that he's involved with releasing folks from jails who do not have a criminal record, who have drug offenses. And a lot of the Black community, men in particular, are very, very, very involved with that and passionate about that, and are giving him rewards for that. And finally, she's told me that this is a lot. I mean, this is already number 4, that, you know, he's had a great economy. People had a job. They have a SAC. They get to go to work. They have their job. And that's a good thing. You know, for an average guy, they're going to reward that guy who gives them a job. The only other thing that I didn't like, particularly, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but I'm just relaying what she said, is they don't particularly like Kamala Harris.
Mm.
And the fact that there's something about her and her record as a prosecutor in San Francisco and in California, which was put a lot of brothers in jail. That spread, and I don't think there's I don't know how to say it. I just think that they didn't see her as a vice presidential candidate that they were excited about. That's what she said. I'm telling you what she said. This is not my opinion, but this is what she told me. And I've seen subsequent articles in newspapers talking about this issue of Black men voting for the president. So she was on to something. Does that surprise you, Reverend?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Does that any of the stuff I said surprise you?
No. It surprised me that people would vote because of those things, but they are rewards. Those are political rewards. They also carry a price. And so I'm surprised but it doesn't surprise me. Those are all standard things that I've also heard in the press. I want to say something else about the Harris. A person who is very much pro-Biden said that Harris was the worst choice because of Biden's age, and that it would be a pathway for the first Black female president if Biden did not complete his term, or if at the end of his term, she ran as the heir apparent. So I think there's a lot of dimensions with Harris as a candidate. And this person wrote from day one that was the worst choice Biden could make, and recommended that Biden select a younger white male.
Wow. You know, Reverend, one of the things that I was surprised last night at the margin for Lindsey Graham, because so much that had been said up to the election would lead one to believe that it would have been a very close race between Graham and Harrison. And I know I had a lot of kind of dream scenarios of what it would be like to have 2 African-American senators from South Carolina, from 2 different parties, and the ability that we would then have to really put on the pressure to both of them to model bipartisan cooperation on so many social causes. And I think there could have been some great potential there. But so I was surprised with that. I also kept noticing as they were looking at some of the other races that there were a number of African-American women and African-American candidates who were not doing well. And it'll be interesting to see in Georgia what the runoff between Loeffler and Warnock will be too, because people are already lining up on that one. You know, it raised concerns for me about the whole systemic racism happening behind the secrecy of the ballot and so on. And again, some of it may have been about principle and party, platforms, but it's hard not to notice that.
I'm going to change gears with us.
Mhm.
One of my greatest concerns is what will happen concerning COVID-19
Mhm.
if the current administration stays in office. Am I the only one with that concern? And what do you feel in your faith communities?
Hmm.
I heard our current president say he was going to fire
Hmm.
the world's expert,
Oh, gee.
Fauci, in just a little while. And let me just say, one of the things that is true about Trump is that for most of his, unlike any other candidate, for most of his platform issues, he does seem to work toward them.
Mhm.
Even a wall, he does work toward.
Yeah.
So when he says things like, I'm going to fire Fauci, I think he means it.
Mhm.
I'm the only one with a concern. Yes, sir.
I'm trying to help you out here, Reverend. I'm trying to help you out. I think there are a couple things. First, I think, if I may be not reading it, 100% right, but I don't think for a lot of folks who support the president that the COVID issue was the top priority issue. And I think for a lot of them, the economy was probably more important. Aside from one issue, people, like, reproductive issues, I think that the COVID issue was not as important for them. And so I got a feeling that we are also on two different wavelengths about some of the notions that have been coming out of the administration about creating herd immunity and knowing what that means in terms of how many more will die in order to achieve that. The question about whether the FDA can be trusted or the CCD can be trusted, and whether a vaccination can be trusted to be effective or safe, which is two different things. So I kind of I think, like, if we are left with, if the president succeeds and becomes a president, which we will of course accept, and have to accept that, and everybody, being a good loser means being gracious and being a good sport, and I wish others would take that advice. But I am concerned about those things and the COVID, because I think we will hit, we're going to easily surpass 300,000 people. And I think if anybody, all those people that have lost their loved ones, there's got to be, millions of people. I got 9-10 million people have got the virus. And we'll probably hit some point before the end of spring, 500,000. There'll be, vaccinations. I just don't know how effective or safe they're going to be. And I'm concerned about how to measure not only my own judgment about taking a vaccination, but my congregation, just because somebody says so,
Mhm.
even Dr. Fauci. So I'm a little concerned because we've seen such a diminution of trust in institutions, whether we can really trust what comes out of our public health officials as being accurate and
Yeah.
truthful. So I'm concerned about that. I just at the doctor's this morning, and he said, "No, don't worry. There'll be a vaccination." Easy for him to say, and I'll be waiting to see him take the vaccination, and let's see how it goes in 2 or 3 months. If I can all postpone it, I would like to postpone it. But I've had congregants in our temple that have had COVID and have recovered, which is great. So I have some concerns about where does this issue now stand?
Mhm.
Where are we in terms of the school system, in terms of public health and masking and restaurants and public places like sports, and let's all get back into the stream of things, and whoever dies, dies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the economy comes first, because that is, from a religious point of view, Reverend, that is an example of a religious issue about whether the economy becomes the new golden calf.
Yeah. And I agree, Rabbi, that one of my big concerns has been the emphasis on, it's all about the economy and get people back to work and get them back in active society and spending money and so on. But I think when I could probably speak for the sisters in my community, which is based in Pennsylvania, but also spread across 6 states. We run a continuing care retirement community in Pennsylvania that services a little bit fewer than 400 people. So independent, assisted, Alzheimer's care on the personal care level, as well as on the skilled level, skilled rehab, the whole works. And because we're a not-for-profit and we're obligated by the state of Pennsylvania to take 2/3 people who are low income, we subsidize it. We also rely on Medicare and Medicaid. And so I think, that there's a whole wide concern about having a dedication of government on all levels to assist us, because the Catholic healthcare system, which was extensive across America, has suffered great attrition in recent years because we've been overwhelmed by the for-profit system, and we have been overwhelmed by the inability of our donors to take up the slack when the funding that is just not adequate, Medicaid funding not being adequate to meet the per patient cost, for example. So I think, in that realm, definitely there's a long Catholic tradition of saying we really need to be able to work with the government to trust that there's going to be an investment in human health, and also in things like, decent health insurance, prescription care. I've mentioned before, the sisters I live with are at the St. Francis Center over on St. Helena Island. They are forever giving prescription assistance to people. They're calling pharmacies and paying bills. So they're counting on those donors to keep cranking money in. The volunteers in medicine, you've got to have all these resources active, but you've also got to have a trustworthy government, state and national, that can prioritize taking care of people,
What I'm thinking to myself is, it's now Wednesday. Friday night is our Sabbath. Rabbis will be in the Reform movement, or Saturday mornings. We'll be all looking there saying, what do we want, if they all say to our congregations, that will intone scripture, that will give guidance as to where we go from here, whether you chose Trump and he doesn't become president, or Biden and he doesn't become president. How do we move forward, knowing we didn't agree on policy issues? Not all Jews agree on, except the 2 Jews can agree on is what the 3rd should give to the synagogue. But I think that's, I'm working in my head about where am I right now. I'm working through my own issues personally and thinking, what is the scriptural message from the Torah that I need to say, given that I have to, the chapters that we work in are what you would call lectionary, which is Genesis 21 through 23. And that's where I have to look for guidance to be loyal to the Torah portion this week. And how do I make that resonate for our congregation in a way that can be an all-inclusive message? That's my biggest concern as I move closer to that deadline.
Bishop Dixon,
You share some things.
Rabbi's concerned, what's the sermon this weekend?
Well, it's a good, I mean, these are some very deep issues, obviously, and they're complicated. I guess what I've been thinking as I've been listening to Rabbi Bloom and Sister Smith is uh, Latter-day Saints, at least, the issue that we tend to juggle is, um, I mean, our doctrine naturally pushes us towards caring for the poor and the needy. It's in our mission statements. It's part of our identity and our philosophy. The question is the execution, right? And that's where we're starting to see more diversity. Who is the stopgap at the end of the day? Who is the safety net? Is it the government, or is it communities and faith institutions like ours? Is it our neighbors and our people, or is it, again, tax programs? Maybe it's a combination. I'm sensing from Catholic Church that they work hand in hand in a lot of ways. Whereas in the Latter-day Saint Church, it wasn't too long ago when members were struggling, we would work very hard to help them become self-reliant without government aid and assistance. That's no longer the case, but there was a period of time where we worked very, very hard to make our people self-reliant, and we still do today. We have a number of programs and workshops with that end in mind. And when I give aid, and one of my responsibilities as a bishop is to administer welfare assistance to those that are poor and needy. And sometimes they're not even members of our congregation. I've had that opportunity, but I treat that as a widow's mite. I have to be careful with those funds. And so when I give those out, there are assignments, there are commitments that those people make. So that way they become independent and self-reliant, which is what we believe God wants for his children. And so again, these are complicated issues, and Latter-day Saints typically, I guess my perspective is that the sermon would be that this is where the faith community needs to step up. When we do not have the government running the way we want, or do not have the programs providing what we wish they would, then people should look to us, and I hope they will look to us. My biggest concern is if we become a secular nation, like some of our European neighbors, who have fantastic programs, but don't rely on their faith communities and their core values, as Rabbi Bloom referred to, then I think that there's a bigger risk at the end of the day in terms of the purpose of man's existence on earth and our families and what we're supposed to learn while we're living here. And so I'm not sure I have an easy answer other than that's probably what we're struggling with. And I see faith being a very important role in this nation and why it was founded, where it came from. And I certainly pray and hope that we won't abandon that.
Rabbi, my wheels were turning as you were talking about your text. And of course, I jumped to Deuteronomy 30, choose life that you and your descendants may live. And I think probably if I were in your situation, I'd say God stayed Abraham's hand. The message was don't slay Isaac. And then we can talk to each other about don't slay the immigrant at the border. Don't slay the Black man who has been picked up by the police. Don't slay the elderly person who can't pay for the prescription. And, what can we do to help the children in those failing schools in the corridor of shame in South Carolina? The kind of what are the situations right around us that help us to get Isaac back down the mountain, and not have him slain. So I think that would be, again, how do we pick up the pieces that maybe we can't trust our government to pick up? That would be probably where I'd go.
That's a good one. I like the Binding of Isaac story is a good story because the one thing I noticed when I was reading it over for the 10,000th time in my life, I noticed that the end of the story when they returned to Beersheba after having been on Mount Moriah, they never talk again. They never talk. And that is one of the scariest things about what could happen.
Yeah.
Is that we don't talk, that we don't engage, that we further tunnel into our little moats, create moats, and that we never talk and we just sort of inhabit space but never dialogue. I was thinking like that, and I was thinking that when Abraham, when the angel of the Lord says, you know, Abraham, don't send your hand against this
Mhm.
lad and don't make a blemish against him. And I'm thinking how one's faith, you can have so much faith to say that you would actually kill your own son for the sake of your faith in God. Would you really do that? It's because God told you to do it. And I think Abraham's lesson as he learns is that, no, you're not going to have to do it. Even
Right.
though you were willing to, you proved your point. But the fact that, you know, he was willing to, you could say that's good and that's bad.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
so I don't know. I'm working on it. I'm working on it because there's
Mhm.
got to be a message from Scripture that, I mean, remember I'm confined to a two or three chapters, and then
Yeah.
there's this story of Hagar and
Yeah.
you know, sending people out into the desert.
Yeah.
And you know, just thinking that you get rid of them, that therefore they're out of your mind, out of sight, out of mind. I don't know. I'm struggling with it. I really
Mhm.
am. So I appreciate that, Sister Pam. I appreciate it very much. I like that what you said.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're
May
welcome.
I add on a little bit then?
Yeah.
I appreciated both of those comments, and Dr. Black, but maybe you'll get a chance to speak too here. My sermon is partly going to be echoing what the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints recently shared with us. And since we're talking Old Testament, you know, the house of Israel is something that Latter-day Saints follow and study very closely. And it's partly why we do so much family history and genealogical work, and why we send out missionaries on full-time missions, because we believe in the literal gathering of the house of Israel. You mentioned recently that the word Israel, one of the translations, Hebraic translations, is the phrase, let God prevail. I don't know if you want to correct me, Rabbi Bloom, but I thought that that was very timely, a reminder that the term let God prevail in our lives is probably more important now than ever. And I think that's what Abraham was doing, was he was allowing God to prevail above and before all else in his life as a consecrated son of God. And I'd like to read just one statement, if I may, from what President Nelson shared. Is that okay, Dr. Black? Okay. He said, we can choose to be of Israel or not. We can choose to let God prevail in our lives or not. We can choose to let God be the most powerful influence in our lives or not. I grieve that our Black brothers and sisters in the world over are enduring the pains of racism and prejudice. Today, I call upon our members everywhere to lead out in abandoning attitudes and actions of prejudice. I plead with you to promote respect for all of God's children. The question for each of us, regardless of race, is the same. Are you willing to let God prevail in your life? Are you willing to let God be the most important influence in your life? Will you allow his words, his commandments, and his covenants to influence what you do each day? Will you allow his voice to take priority over every other? And are you willing to let whatever he needs you to do to take precedence over every other ambition? Are you willing to have your will swallowed up in his? It's a little difficult to connect the dots on what that means when we let God prevail in our lives, but I think certainly that's one of the things that the faith community can bring to a nation that is somewhat divided and broken and looking for some form of healing.
I want to jump in and take two things that were said and put together. First, Rabbi, I'm going to give you a Black liberation reimagining of your text. And in the Black liberation reimagining, not only does the conversation ceases with Abraham and Isaac, but also with Abraham and God. And reimagining says, God is like, I've been speaking to you and you don't know me by now. I would never ask you to kill your son. And it's a disappointment. And, you know, that's the Black reimagining. And that sometimes we think we're religiously right. And then our eyes are open and we realize I was doing the exact opposite of what God would have me to do. And that's common. That's a common religious experience. And I'm speaking, I'm gonna own this in Christianity. I'm not putting this on Judaism at all. I'm gonna own this in Christianity. You know, groups that have caused genocide thought they were following the voice of God. groups that had enslaved other people, thought they were following the voice of God, and had gotten it correct a few times. But then they killed their children, you know, in the sense of those groups that died. And so that's another reimagining Black liberation theology that takes the text and says, you know, listen to this lens of history. And so that's another place to go. But I want to bring two things together. I was kind of interested in hearing Bishop Dixon address some things, and Sister Smith. One was, I think, Bishop Dixon was, I think, addressing some issues from the individual agency, and Sister Smith was from the organizational level. And I think both have to happen. My family came out of a tradition of thrift, that's what they called it, which basically was self-reliance. We came out of the Free African Society, which was one of the first insurance companies, that's how I view it, in the nation, where we took care of each other. And if someone died and left a child that was a minor, this group would take care of that child, and those, all the widow, the widower, and those kind of things. But at the same time, we realized that we needed to address systemic issues. So we had on the individual, I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to, you know, do the things I need to do to take care of me. But then I also realized there are forces that need to be addressed to make the system work correctly, like forces of racism, sexism, xenophobia, those kind of things. And so I think both have to happen. And I think you both said that, but I'm putting you together. Both have to happen, the systemic, addressing the system and addressing the individual. And they both do. Rabbi, we preached your sermon for you. We want the tape.
I appreciate it. You preached a couple sermons. You preached a couple sermons, and I like the fact that that my colleagues can help me out here. I appreciate we need to do this on a weekly basis for weekly sermons. I thank you for that. I think we all have to, you know, religious leaders, you know, we have two roles. Like, we have a place in the public square where we need to act out our values. And we have an internal conversation with our congregants inside the walls of these sacred institutions. And while the you know, there are some different nuances on both of these, even though it's the same golf swing, as they say. There's different speaking to your audience versus outside. And I want the religious community to look relevant.
Right.
You know, I want whether it's the Latter-day or the Jewish or Roman Catholics, I want them to look relevant to the conversation in our country. I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of colleagues. What was it that you were saying, Reverend, about the minister during your prayer walk, who said, I'm praying with, you know, he doesn't want to wear a mask. That's the kind of person that we should be having conversations with, because he needs or she would need to listen to us, and vice versa. It's good to talk to people that are different, from different religious stripes, because we find out what we have in common. But what happens when you find out people that you don't have stuff in common with? That you still occupy the same space in a community.
Right.
Your children still go to the same schools. You still walk in the same pathways. How can we get those people? Because I think learning how to listen to people who agree with you is not so hard. But to talk to people that you can agree to disagree with, then sort of have a respect that comes out of that disagreement. You can, you know, there's a certain level, like some of my people would say, I don't want to talk to those people over there that voted for President or Vice President Biden. I don't want to talk to the other people. How do you get over that? You can't, that's not good. You know, that's not good. I'm just trying to think, how can the religious message continue the ecumenical dialogue, is what I'm also looking at here too. You know, my faith tradition has a place called the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C. And this is a political advocacy group that represents the reform movement that lobbies in the Capitol, just like many other religions do.
Mhm.
And they want to lobby for political policy issues. And we want to, in our own grassroots level, want to deal with what we can handle. But we are concerned about policy issues. What happens if they get rid of the Affordable Care Act? Are we going to then, as synagogues and churches, take care of people's medical needs? When all of a sudden this is struck down? I think there are certain things that are beyond our capacity, and that we're not going to be able to do, no matter what our intentions are, when millions of people are not allowed to have insurance because of pre-existing those kinds of issues that can be taken out in a minute. That kind of concerns me a little bit, as to I want to go into reflection and have solitude and be with my God, but I don't want to miss out on those issues too. I'm balancing between solitude, which is what I really like right now, and engagement. I need both. And I'm concerned about the policy because I don't know. I think there's limited capacity for religion today to deal with those kinds of big, broad issues that will cause great suffering. And if we can't put something in a chicken in each pot, what good is religion? We have to give them, how are we going to help them with all that? That's a tough issue. So I don't know. I'm wavering back and forth. 1 minute I'm feeling very optimistic and giving guidance. The next minute I'm troubled by what I see in this vote. And I'm concerned for the welfare of the needy, the poor, and disadvantaged minority groups. I'm very concerned.
I want to go back to where you started, and I'm going to push it to Bishop Dixon. Rabbi was talking about how do we in the faith community express some type of unity or interrelationships with our diversity. And I'm going to be a little heavy-handed. You got something planned for Friday night, don't you?
I think you have something planned for Friday night.
Yes.
So yeah, our two congregations will be getting together Friday night, the AME Church and the Hilton Head Ward of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because we need to get to know each other better. And I think that's a step in the right direction. If we're going to be relevant to Rabbi Bloom, I think we need to interconnect and lock arms a little more effectively, maybe, than we have in the past, even if we're still diverse. I think our common faith, there's probably more that we share in common that's more important than what we differ on, is I guess what I would say there. So yeah, I look forward to, it'll be a meeting in our parking lot, your parking lot, right, at the AME Church, and get to learn a little bit about each other. And that's part of it. I just watched The King and I with my daughter who loves musicals. She just left for Hawaii to serve her mission for a year and a half. And we must have watched a musical every night for like a month. It was just crazy. And we watched The King and I, and of course there's a song in there, I think it's in that one, that says getting to know you, right? And we need to get to know each other a little better. So, I think Rabbi Bloom and Dr. Black, you're setting a good example by forming what we did today here a little bit. I would caution us against two things that at least have stuck out to me as I've prayed about this issue. The first thing is that we need to see each other more deeply. David Brooks, a New York columnist and the author of The Road to Character, he has a lot of opinions that are certainly, I would consider fairly liberal. But I love what I've learned from him quite a bit. But he said this, he said, many of society's great problems flow from people not feeling seen or known. So think about that. Many of us feel like we're invisible. There is a core trait that we will all have to get better at, and that is the trait of seeing each other deeply and being deeply seen. Now, on the flip side, a conservative author, also with the same last name, Brooks, Arthur Brooks, gave a talk about contempt. And I would postulate that contempt is we have a culture of contempt going on in social media. And we have to be aware of that, because I believe Lucifer, and we have to remember there is an adversary out there, at least I believe, who is working to divide our marriages, our families, our communities, and our nation. And that's what he does. He divides, and that hurts us. And so contempt, if you read, as I've been studying psychology, as you know, and I like the Gottman's research. They studied 3,000 marriages. And as Dr. Black and I talked about marriages, it's a great metaphor for what we're facing today. Our spouses are different from us, right, Dr. Black? Very unique, and yet it adds a richness to our lives that wouldn't be there otherwise. But if you want to see a marriage that's in trouble, look for contempt in an interaction and how they manage their differences. If you see contempt, you can predict not only if they're on the path towards divorce, but how many times they'll be sick in the next year. How about that? That's how closely they've broken down the occurrences of contempt. And that basically means contempt is just rolling your eyes at somebody, dismissing someone, saying they're worthless because they're different than you. And unfortunately, I'm seeing so much of that now. So I'm going to reject that concept. And if we're going to unify in our communities, then it has to be at the grassroots level with our neighbors. And regardless of our differences, whether outward or inward, I don't care anymore. I'm going to love everyone, and I'm going to reach out to everybody and not dismiss any thought, any practice, because everyone is valuable. And with that kind of attitude, I'm hoping that that will trickle down in my congregation and to those that I interact with. And I hope I'll be a better man because of it.
I wish we could continue. You know, we're at the end of our time. So we're going to go around the square and get your closing remarks. And I'm going to start with Sister Smith.
Okay, I'm hoping that we can continue these dialogues. And if I were going to be in town on Friday, I think I'd be showing up in your parking lot because unfortunately, the sisters I live with and I are going to be out of town Friday till Monday for a gathering that was planned much earlier. But I would like to be participating in that and also having us continue some of these conversations. We talked about that when we were at the synagogue, and about continuing to do some things, because I think just the whole idea of modeling to people, the people who come from different perspectives and different directions maybe in their faith, can be friends, can understand one another, can respect each other's positions, and also hoping that we can do some things, some real action steps on behalf of the common good. Even if it's simply in our local area, there are so many needs.
I'm going to switch the order. Rabbi, do you want to give your closing comments now?
Before I speak, I'd like to say a few words. That's supposed to be a joke.
Okay.
I've learned something from my 2-year-old grandson that's been helping me through this time. And when I see him on FaceTime, I decided to take a lesson. So what I did is, when I sit here and listen to and participate in so many Zoom conference calls, I need something to occupy my hands. And because otherwise, I don't want to eat a snack, or it's not polite. So I bought a whole slew, folks, a whole slew of different colors of Play-Doh.
Mm-hmm.
And when my grandson, when we FaceTime each other and he sees my Play-Doh and he shows me his Play-Doh, and I take out all these different colors, and 1 minute it's yellow and the next minute it's purple, and I'm looking at all these colors, and as I continue on, it helps me to think, and see, here's purple now. So, and I keep playing with this, and I keep pushing it, and I keep stretching it, and what am I creating? What am I creating? And I see how far I can pull it apart. How far? So I thought, there's got to be a metaphor here of why I'm doing this all the time. There's got to be a metaphor. And it's got to be something that relates to what I'm trying to conclude with. And I think that, as funny as it is to talk about Play-Doh, which to me is kind of goofy, maybe I'm learning that we are all sculpting and shaping our lives.
Mhm.
And we're all trying to stretch, and we need to stretch. And we are in control of ourselves, and we can shape who we become. And there is a sense of individual responsibility that behooves us to remember what I pray on, like you all pray on. And I believe if there's one sentence that kind of sums up for me, going into what I would call perilous waters, uncharted waters, and that is pray as if everything depended on God, act as if everything depended on you.
Mhm.
And to me, whether that's dealing with policy or persons or an individual charity, I've got to use that as my flashlight into the darkness. I'd rather see the light going out rather than the light coming at me. And that's what I'm working on is shaping myself and seeing if I am doing what God wants me to do, and hopefully using the light that shines a pathway to doing some good in this world.
Thank you, sir. Bishop Dixon.
Well, thank you. I realize I'm a pretty small fry here with public leaders and faith leaders. My ministry is mostly focused on helping my congregation and myself just grow and serve where we stand and help. And so I just know that your Latter-day Saint friend neighbors are here for you. If there's some causes that are important, there's some needs that are important. We care about them, and hopefully you've seen that when we've had disasters in our communities. But I'd like to go beyond that and not just be your friends in times of disaster. And so I've learned a lot. I want you to know in listening to the three of you today. And I'm not used to mixing religion and politics, and so this is new for me, and I've learned much. And I appreciate the metaphor of the Play-Doh as well, Rabbi. I'm going to think about that. Good. And Sister Smith, I learned a ton from you. And I'll just share a brief experience. When I was a young man in high school, I was the victim of some bullying. It was my junior year, and there were some young men that were starting to pick on me, and they would hit me in the hallways, and I actually began to feel afraid to go to school. And I turned to my father, and I asked him what I should do. And he was a high school math teacher, and I thought he might rescue me. Right? He might go to the principal and rescue me. Instead, he invited me to pray for these boys. And that changed my life because as I began to pray for these young men, almost unwillingly at first, my heart changed. Well, first of all, they stopped. They left me alone. That was the first miracle. It was a miracle too. I can't explain other than God intervened. But he changed my heart towards these young men because I realized I began to feel that they probably endure their own hardships. Maybe they're bullied at home. Maybe they don't have what I have in my life. And I actually began to care about them. And I share that thought with the Spirit that there are no good guys or bad guys. In our community, very few at least. There are some, right? But our enemies are much fewer than sometimes the media and our political positions might paint them as. And so my hope is that in a spirit of love and brotherhood, that we can have our hearts softened through these difficult times, that we can inspire our members and those around us and inspire goodness and unity and friendship and compassion and empathy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm going to close with someone who inspired me. We have several new families, but one new family, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and they attended one of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. It was very peaceful. It wasn't no protest that we did this summer. And then they joined our church. They left their church, and very much a Ruth move. Your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God. And they have humbled me because they feel that's what it takes to bring our community together. to, I mean, totally jump off the deep end into this African Methodist Episcopal Church. And they're not the only white family we have, but it's such courage. And so I'm just going to seek, and I find in me that kind of courage as we go forward. I don't know where it will take me or lead me, and I don't know where it will take our ministry, but I think it's going to take that level of courage. It's Abraham type courage to go wherever God is leading us and guiding us as we reconstitute humanity, theologically, as we create a new creation. Well, those are the words for today. I appreciate you all giving me this valuable time. Very, very busy schedule. We're going to end the formal session, but I want you just to give me a second after we close, just to ask some questions.
Sure.
God bless you one and all.
Shalom.
God bless you.
Bless.